The land was the color of a lion's hide, old and sun-baked and stretching to a sky so blue it hurt the eyes. This was the West. It was not the West of paintings or books. It was a place of rock and thorn, a vast, empty basin that held the heat of a blacksmith's forge. The mountains in the distance were not green and gentle. They were sharp, purple shadows, like broken teeth against the horizon. The silence was not peaceful. It was a heavy, waiting silence, full of distance and the dry rattle of things unseen. This land did not welcome. It challenged. It dared you to survive. Into this emptiness, the stagecoach was a noisy, profane intrusion. It rattled and swayed, its iron-shod wheels grinding stones into dust. The dust was a living thing. It rose in a cloud behind them, a powdery, choking fog that coated every surface. It settled on the passengers, filling the creases of their clothing, turning black coats brown, lining their mouths and nostrils with grit. Emma McAllister sat upright, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had been trying to keep her spine rigid for 2,000 miles. It was the last piece of her old life she possessed her posture. She was a woman of 28 years, and in the polite parlors of Boston, that age had been a quiet failure. Here, in this bouncing wooden box, it felt like a different kind of ending. She had been the daughter of a wealthy man. The McAllister house in Boston had been brick, with ivy climbing the walls and windows that looked out over a green, ordered park. She remembered the scent of beeswax and lemon oil, the soft whisper of silk gowns, the weight of a silver fork in her hand. She had been educated. She could play the pianoforte. She spoke passable French. She knew which fork to use. These skills were useless here. They were like a foreign currency, valuable once, but now just dead weight in her memory. Then came the failure. The business of her father, something to do with ships and cargo from distant lands, had collapsed. It had happened not with a crash, but with a slow, suffocating quiet. The servants were let go, one by one. The silver was sold. The pianoforte fell silent. Her father, a man who had seemed as tall and strong as his own ship's masts, had shrunk. He became a gray man, haunting his own empty library. Her mother had simply faded. She took to her bed, and a sickness of the spirit had invited a sickness of the body. Emma had sat by that bed, watching the woman who had taught her posture and grace simply let go, as if the effort of breathing in a world of reduced means was too great. After the funeral, when the last of the creditors had picked the house clean, her father had produced a letter. It was from a man in the Arizona Territory, a Mr. Silas Croft, a name she did not know. Her father had explained, his eyes fixed on the bare wooden floor, that this Mr. Croft was a man of some substance. He owned a great deal of land, a ranch, cattle. He was a man who had built a life from nothing, and he was a man who sought a wife. The arrangement had been made. Emma was the last asset. Her passage west was her father's final payment on an old debt. She was not a bride. She was a settlement. Mr. Croft had not asked for a portrait. His letter, written in a stark, functional hand, had specified only that he required a woman of good breeding and respectable family, someone who could manage a household and be a companion. He had not mentioned love. He had not mentioned affection. He had mentioned duty. Emma looked at her hands, still folded in her lap. The skin was dry and cracked from the alkaline dust. The other passengers in the coach were a misery. A salesman with a loud, wet voice spoke endlessly of harnesses and the future of Tucson. A young woman, barely 19, held a baby that fussed and cried, its thin wail a needle of sound in the oppressive heat. They had all looked at Emma when she boarded in Santa Fe. They saw the good quality of her traveling suit, now ruined with dust. They saw the absence of a wedding band. They saw her age, etched in the tired lines around her eyes. She was a spinster, and she was alone. They knew what that meant. She was going to a husband she had never met. She felt their pity, and beneath it, their faint, unspoken contempt. She turned her face to the window. letting the hard leather curtain bump against her temple. She was lonely. It was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. And she was afraid. She was afraid of the land, of the emptiness, of the man who waited for her, this Silas Croft. What kind of man bartered for a wife? What would he expect of her? She tried to feel resolved, to think of this as a new life, a new beginning, but it felt like the end of a long fall. She closed her eyes, and all she could see was the dust. 50 miles to the north, in the high country, where the desert gave way to scrub pine and canyons of red rock, a man watched the sun begin its slow descent. He was not watching the beauty of it. He was watching the way the shadows moved. The shadows were his allies. His name was Caleb Blackhawk. The soldiers at the forts called him Thunder, though they had never said it to his face. He was 35 years old. He was a man built of the land itself, lean and hard, with muscle forged from walking, not from lifting. His skin was the color of the red earth, his black hair long and tied back with a simple leather strip. He moved with a silence that was absolute, his moccasins making no sound on the rock. He was, by the laws of the white men, an outlaw. To his own heart, he was simply a man who refused to be penned. He had once had a wife whose laugh was like the sound of water over stones, a son, a small boy with serious eyes, learning to track. They had lived in a small village, a place of peace. Then the soldiers had come. It was not a battle. It was a removal, a cleansing. They had come with their blue coats and their rattling wagons, and they had taken everything. His wife, his son, his parents, his home. They were gone, swallowed by the reservation system, or perhaps by the earth itself. He had not been there. He had been hunting. When he returned, he found only ash and the tracks of shod horses. That was many seasons ago. The grief was no longer a fire. It was a cold, hard stone inside him. He did not trust the world of the white man. He did not trust their laws, their fences, their pieces of paper that claimed to own the land. He did not believe in their limits. He lived as his fathers had, by the seasons and the sky, taking what he needed and fighting when he must. He was a ghost in the mountains, a rumor whispered by settlers, a frustration for the army. He was a free man, and he was, in a way that Emma McAllister would have understood, profoundly, terribly alone. He had seen the stagecoach from a high ridge earlier that day, a smudge of dust moving slowly across the basin. He knew its route. He knew its schedule. He knew it carried the things the settlers needed: mail, money, and more people. Each coach was another nail in the coffin of the world he had known. He felt a cold, familiar anger. It was a heavy, slow, burning thing. He did not plan to attack it. He was not a raider of coaches. He hunted deer, not passengers. He warred with the soldiers who hunted him, not with civilians. But he watched it. He watched it as a hawk watches a snake, a thing of another world, a potential danger, a disturbance in the order of things. He made his camp as the sky turned from orange to a deep, bruised purple. He built no fire. A fire was a beacon. He sat against a slab of granite, chewing slowly on a strip of dried venison. He thought of the world that was vanishing. He thought of the son he would never teach to hunt. He thought of the empty years stretching before him, as vast and as barren as the desert below. Back in the stagecoach, the motion had finally stopped. They had reached a way station, a miserable squat building of adobe brick sitting alone in the twilight. The passengers stumbled out, stiff and aching. Emma moved last, her legs unsteady. The station master, a man with a stained beard and hopeless eyes, served them a stew of questionable meat and beans. Emma could not eat. She drank a little of the lukewarm, metallic-tasting water. The salesman was talking to the station master. "Heard any trouble on the trail ahead?" The station master grunted, wiping a hand on his apron. "Always trouble. Apaches." The young mother holding her baby flinched, pulling the blanket tighter around the child. "Which ones?" the salesman pressed. Have not seen any sign. You do not see them, the station master said. Not until it is too late. They say Black Hawk is in these hills. That one. He is poison. He lost his whole family, they say, makes a man mean. Emma listened, a new, specific fear joining the general dread in her heart. Apaches. She had heard the stories in the East. Wild men, savages. The word Black Hawk meant nothing to her. Just another name for the darkness that surrounded this tiny, flickering light of civilization. She stepped outside the station, needing to escape the smell of boiled meat and stale fear. The night air was cooler, but the land felt even larger in the dark. The stars were brilliant, more stars than she had ever seen, scattered like spilled diamonds on black velvet. They were cold, distant, and offered no comfort. She was so very far from home. Home was gone. She had no home. She was a piece of cargo. Halfway to her destination, a 28-year-old bride, too old for the suitors of Boston, now being delivered to a stranger in a land of dust and shadows. She felt a single, hot tear trace a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She angrily wiped it away. She was a McAllister. She had her posture. She would not cry. She would survive this. She took a deep breath of the dry, sage-scented air and looked out into the vast, dark, and challenging land. She did not know that high above her, on a mountain ridge, a man whose name she had just heard spoken in fear was also looking at those same cold stars. His heart a mirror of her own loneliness. His freedom as profound and as terrifying as her captivity. The stagecoach would move on in the morning, and their fates, tied to this harsh, beautiful, and unforgiving country, were rattling closer together with every turn of the wheel. The sun was a brass hammer, striking the roof of the coach. The heat inside was thick, smelling of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey from the salesman's flask, and the sour milk of the baby's clothes. Emma had given up trying to stay clean. The dust was a second skin. They had been traveling for hours, climbing a long, winding grade that followed the curve of a dry riverbed. On one side, the land fell away into a deep, rocky canyon. On the other, a high wall of red rock rose up, fractured and split, offering 1,000 places for a man to hide. The salesman was quiet today. His bravado from the night before sweated out of him. The young mother, whose name Emma had learned was Sarah, looked pale and sick, her baby mercifully quiet at her breast. The driver and the shotgun guard outside were just voices, a giddy-up or a haw that drifted in through the leather curtains. Emma was staring at the rock wall, tracing the patterns of shadow and light, when the world exploded. The first sound was a rifle shot, sharp and flat, echoing instantly off the canyon wall. It was followed by a man's scream, cut short. The coach lurched, throwing Emma hard against Sarah. The baby shrieked. Then came a barrage of gunfire, a rolling, chaotic thunder that seemed to come from all sides. The coach pitched violently to one side, the shriek of tortured wood and metal ending in a ground-shaking crash. Emma was on the floor, tangled with Sarah and the crying child. The salesman was trying to push the door open, his face a mask of white terror. Outside, men were shouting, "Get the box! Pull him out!" The door was ripped open, not by the salesman, but by a large, bearded man who smelled of sweat and rancid bacon. He grabbed the salesman by his fancy vest and hauled him out like a sack of grain. Another man, this one younger, with empty eyes and a stained bandana over his face, pointed a long-barreled pistol inside. "Out!" he yelled. "All of you get out now!" Sarah scrambled out, clutching her baby, sobbing, "Please, please, we have nothing." Emma followed, her limbs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Her posture, her Boston dignity, it was all gone. She was just a trembling animal. There were 5 of them. They were white men, dressed in a mix of stolen army coats and rough civilian clothes. They were not warriors. They were human wolves, and they had the scent of weakness. The driver and the guard were on the ground, unmoving. The bandits had already torn the strongbox from the boot and were smashing it open with a rifle butt. The bearded leader turned his attention to the passengers. He tore the salesman's watch from his pocket. He ripped a simple gold locket from Sarah's neck. She cried out, "It was my mother's." The man just laughed and shoved her, sending her stumbling into the dust. He turned to Emma. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering. He saw the quality of her dress, even ruined as it was. He saw the fine leather of her shoes. He saw her, a woman alone, undefended. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping closer. "What have we here, a fine lady? Got any pretty things for me? Darling." Emma was frozen. Her mind was blank with terror. She could not speak. "Check her luggage." The leader barked to one of his men. "To Emma," he said. "Or maybe the prettiest thing is just you." He reached out a grimy hand, its knuckles scarred, and touched her hair. "Been a long time since I seen a woman look like you." Emma flinched, a small, desperate sound escaping her throat. This was a new terror. This was worse than the dust, worse than the loneliness, worse than the marriage to a man she did not know. This was the abyss. "Leave her," Sarah cried, finding a spark of courage. "Take what you want. Just leave us be." The leader backhanded Sarah across the face, sending her sprawling. "You shut your mouth," he roared. He turned back to Emma, his eyes alight. "Now, about you and me." He never finished the sentence. There was no sound of approach, no warning. A shadow simply detached itself from the rocks above. The first bandit, the one with the empty eyes, grunted, a sound like a man punched in the stomach. Emma saw the feathered shaft of an arrow protruding from his throat. He dropped his pistol and clawed at his neck, collapsing in a silent, gagging heap. The leader spun around, his pistol coming up. "What in—" An arrow took him in the chest, sinking deep, with enough force to spin him halfway around. He looked down at the shaft, his expression one of pure, stupid surprise. Before he fell, the other three bandits panicked. They raised their rifles, firing wildly at the rocks. "Apaches!" one screamed. "It's Apaches!" A figure moved then, not from the rocks, but from the far side of the overturned coach. He moved with a speed that was not human. He was on the nearest bandit before the man could turn. Emma saw the flash of a knife, a precise, devastating economy of motion. The man was dead before he hit the ground. The last two bandits scrambled for their horses. One of them, screaming in pure animal fear, managed to get his foot in the stirrup. A fourth arrow sprouted from his back. He slumped over the saddle, and the terrified horse bolted, carrying its dead rider with it. The final bandit threw his rifle down. "I give," he shrieked, raising his hands. "I give." The man who had come from the shadows walked toward him. He was tall, dressed in buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt. His black hair was unbound, moving in the sudden wind. He did not slow down. He did not acknowledge the surrender. The bandit, sobbing, tried to back away. The man's arm moved, and the knife was thrown. It crossed the 10 feet between them in a blink, striking the man in the stomach. The bandit looked down, his hands covering the hilt, and slid to his knees. And then there was silence. The silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. It was filled with the smell of gunpowder and the sudden, awful finality of death. The baby, which had been screaming, was suddenly quiet. Sarah was huddled on the ground, weeping over her child. The salesman was hiding behind a large rock, his eyes wide. Emma stood alone, her back against the hot, splintered wood of the coach. She was looking at the man who had saved her. He stood in the middle of the road, breathing easily, as if he had just been for a walk. He was turning, slowly, scanning the rocks, his rifle now held lightly in one hand. He was an Apache. She knew it instantly. He was the savage from the stories, the poison from the station master's warning. He was Caleb Blackhawk. She did not know how she knew. She just knew. This was him. He finished his scan of the ridges, Satisfied they were alone, he turned his full attention to the scene. He ignored the salesman. He glanced at Sarah and the baby, a brief, assessing look. Then his eyes found Emma. They held her. She could not look away. She had expected to see animal fury, a wildness, but that was not what she saw. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they held the vast, empty sadness of the land itself. But in their depths, there was something else, a hardness. It was an unyielding, unbreakable core, a resolve so cold and so deep it frightened her more than the bandit's greed. It was the look of a man who had seen the end of the world and had kept walking. He was not the monster she had pictured. He was something far more complex and far more dangerous. He was a man who had just killed 5 men in less time than it took to draw a breath. And he looked at her now as if she were the most confusing thing he had ever seen. He walked over to the bodies of the bandits. With practiced, impersonal motions, he retrieved his arrows, wiping them clean on the dead men's shirts. He picked up his knife, his face showing no expression at all. He collected the rifles and ammunition from the dead, and the water canteens from their horses. He turned back to Emma. He did not speak. He simply walked toward her. Emma flattened herself against the coach. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs were water. This man, this Apache, had just saved her from one terrible fate. But what did he intend? He was an outlaw. He had killed. He was the enemy she had been taught to fear her entire life. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her face, at the tear tracks through the dust, at the bruise forming on her cheek where she had struck the coach wall. He looked at her trembling hands. His own hand moved, and she flinched, a small, involuntary gasp. He froze. His hand had been moving toward the canteen at his hip. He stopped, holding his hand out, palm up, to show he meant no harm. The gesture was slow, the way one might approach a terrified horse. He unhooked the canteen and held it out to her. Emma stared at it. Water. He was offering her water. Her eyes lifted from the canteen to his face, and in that moment, beneath the unyielding hardness, beneath the deep well of his grief, she saw it. It was not pity. It was something quieter, a flicker of understanding, a shared knowledge of pain. It was a strange, rough sort of gentleness, as unexpected as a flower blooming on bare rock. He was protecting her. Her hand, still shaking, reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she took the canteen. His skin was warm, dry. The contact was like a small electric shock. She raised the canteen to her lips, her eyes never leaving his. The water was warm and tasted of minerals, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She drank, the water spilling down her chin, washing away the dust and the fear. He watched her. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were not. His eyes were alive, and they were full of contradictions. He was the man she had heard whispered about in fear. Caleb Thunder Blackhawk, and he had just saved her life. She was alone in the desert, her future in ruins, standing in the presence of a man who was both her savior and, according to the world she knew, her mortal enemy. The conflict was a visible thing, a tension in the air between them, as real as the heat and the dust and the silence of the dead. The silence that followed the violence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Caleb Blackhawk moved with a grim, efficient purpose. He did not look at the dead men as men. He saw them as resources. He took their rifles, their ammunition, and their water. He rounded up their horses, which had scattered, calming them with a low word and a steady hand. The salesman, a Mr. Abernathy, had crept out from behind his rock. He was pale and trembling, his eyes darting between Caleb and the bodies on the ground. Sarah, the young mother, was rocking her baby, her sobs now quiet, exhausted shudders. Emma stood, her back still pressed to the splintered wood of the coach, the canteen clutched in her hand. She watched him. He was the most capable human being she had ever seen. He was also the most frightening. Caleb loaded the supplies onto the 4 horses. He approached the salesman. "Mr." Abernathy flinched. "Tucson," Caleb said, his voice a low rasp, like stones rubbing together. "It is 2 days' walk, south. Follow the dry wash. You might live." But what about—" the salesman sputtered, looking at Sarah and the baby. "You cannot just leave us." Caleb's eyes were flat. He turned to Sarah. He had 1 extra canteen. He had a small pouch of dried meat. He held them out to her. She looked at his offering, then at his face, her terror battling with her need. She finally snatched them, cowering back. "Stay off the road," Caleb said. "Keep the child quiet. Move at night." It was not unkind. It was simple fact. It was the law of this place. He could not take them. They were the world he was not part of, and they would die if they tried to follow him. "You are a savage," the salesman shrieked, finding a burst of useless courage. "You kill these men, and now you leave us here to die." Caleb did not even look at him. His gaze moved past the salesman, past Sarah, and settled on Emma. She was different. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was watching him, her face a pale, dusty mask of shock, but her eyes were intelligent. They were taking in the situation, calculating the hopeless arithmetic of her survival. She was alone. She was property, being shipped to a man she had never met. The coach was wrecked. Her life, as it had been planned, was over. He saw all this, and she was not like them. She was not soft. She had the look of something that knew how to break, but had not yet broken. He did not speak. He simply motioned with his head, a single, sharp jerk toward the horses. You come!" Emma's breath hitched. "You cannot," the salesman yelped. "That is Miss McAllister. She is promised to Mr. Silas Croft. He is a powerful man. He will have you hunted down." Caleb turned his head. Slowly. He did not draw his knife. He did not raise his rifle. He just looked at Mr. Abernathy. The salesman's words choked in his throat. The threat was empty, and they all knew it. Silas Croft, whatever his power, was in Tucson. Caleb Blackhawk was here. Caleb looked back at Emma. The invitation, or command, was still there. Emma looked at her choices. She could stay here, with a cowering salesman and a weeping mother, and wait for the sun or the wolves, or worse. Or she could go with this man, this killer, this Apache who lived outside every rule she had ever known. He had saved her life. He was her only chance to see the next sunrise. She did not know his name. She only knew the fear he inspired and the strange, rough gentleness he had shown her. She took a step, then another. She walked away from the wreck, away from the salesman's gaping mouth, and stood by the horse he had indicated. He showed her how to mount, his hand briefly touching her elbow to steady her. The contact was impersonal, but it sent a tremor through her. He swung up onto his own horse, took the reins of the other two, and without a backward glance, he led them away from the road, up a narrow animal trail and into the high, silent rocks. They rode for the rest of the day. He did not push the pace, but it was relentless. Emma had ridden in Boston, in a green park, on a gentle mare with a side saddle. This was different. This was clinging to the back of a strange horse, her legs aching, her ruined dress bunched around her. The man in front of her, Caleb, moved as if he and the horse were one creature. He navigated the broken land without hesitation, his body swaying with the rhythm of the animal, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines. He was a man of absolute silence. The only sounds were the clop of the hooves on stone, the creak of leather, and the whisper of the wind through the sage. For Emma, the silence was a growing weight. She was a woman of conversation, of parlors, of questions and answers. This man was a void. She could not understand him. He was a savage, but he had not harmed her. He had, in fact, saved her from a terrible fate. He had killed 5 men with a speed and efficiency that made her stomach turn. Yet he had been patient with her as she struggled to keep up. He lived apart from all society. He obeyed no law she knew. Why? What had made him this way? That evening, he stopped in a place that looked no different from any other stretch of rocky wilderness. But he found a small spring, a trickle of clean water seeming a rock face. He gave her water. He gave her a piece of the dried venison, which was tough and smoky and tasted better than any food she had ever eaten. She was so hungry. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice sounding strange and loud in the quiet. He did not look at her. He was watching the horizon, though she could see nothing there but the purple line of the distant mountains. "Safe," he said. "Safe from what?" "From everything." His voice was final. It was not an answer. It was a wall. She tried again, needing to break this crushing silence. "Why did you help me back at the coach?" This time, he did look at her. His gaze was so intense it was like a physical touch. It held no softness. It was an assessment. He looked at her for a long, uncomfortable minute. "You were not meant to be food for those men," he said at last. Then he turned away, ending the conversation. They traveled for 2 more days. Emma lost all sense of time. The sun rose, burned the world, and set. The stars came out, cold and bright. She was no longer Emma McAllister, the 28-year-old spinster from Boston. That person was dead, left behind at the wrecked coach. She was now just this, a body that ached, a throat that was always dry, a stomach that was always empty. She was a woman following a ghost. On the 3rd night, he led them high into the hills, into a narrow canyon where a small fire would be hidden. The air was cold, the wind sharp. Emma huddled in her ruined clothes, shivering, watching him. He built a fire, small, almost smokeless. With dry wood he seemed to conjure from the bare rock. He sat across from her, the small flames dancing between them. He was staring into the fire, and for the first time, his face was not a mask. In the flickering light, Emma saw what the sun had hidden. His face was a map of old, deep grief. The lines around his eyes and mouth were not just from squinting into the sun. They were from pain. This was not just a hard man. This was a man who had been hollowed out. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition. She, too, was hollow. Her past was gone. Her future an empty, terrifying blank. They were 2 empty, broken things, sitting by a fire in the vast, uncaring wilderness. The question left her lips before she could stop it. It was quiet, almost a whisper. What was her name? He stiffened. His entire body went rigid. His eyes snapped up from the fire and locked on hers. The hardness was back, but this time it was different. It was the hardness of a wound touched. "Who?" His voice was dangerous. Your family," Emma stemmed, her heart pounding. She was afraid she had gone too far, that she had broken some unspoken rule. "The man at the station, he said you had lost them." She expected him to turn away, to shut her down with his silence. He was still for so long. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the wind in the rocks above. She thought he would not answer. "Her name," he said, and his voice was rough, torn from his throat, "was Nalin." The name hung in the night air, a secret spoken. He looked back into the fire, but he was seeing something else. "My son was Taza." He had spoken the names. He had given her the core of his pain. Emma felt the weight of it, the profound, terrible loss, the polite words she had been taught. The "I am so sorry for your loss" died in her throat. They were cheap. They were useless. Instead, she simply held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not offer pity. She just sat there, in the cold, and accepted the truth of his grief. She saw him. Caleb looked back at her. He saw her, this strange woman from another world, her face smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle. And she was not looking at him with the fear he saw in all the others. She was not looking with pity. She was looking at him with a quiet, level understanding. She, too, was a survivor of a wreck. He had been alone with the stone in his gut for so long. And now, she saw. He moved. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. It was the suddenness of a lightning strike on a dry prairie. In one fluid motion, he was across the small fire, kneeling in front of her. He put one hand on the rock wall beside her head, his arm trapping her. His other hand came up, and his fingers, rough and calloused, touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of soot. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her entire body was electrified. This was it. This was the moment of true danger. But his touch was not violent. It was searching. His eyes were not cold. They were black, and they were blazing with a raw, buried heat. He looked at her mouth. He was not seeing a spinster. He was not seeing a too-old bride, a piece of property. He was seeing a woman. He was seeing her, Emma. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a gentle, polite kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of a decade of loneliness, of a rage and grief so deep he could not contain it. It was fierce and possessive. It was the kiss of a man dying of thirst. For Emma, it was an explosion. Nothing in her 28 years of quiet, passionless duty had prepared her for this. No man had ever looked at her with such hunger. No one had ever wanted her like this. She had been taught to think of herself as past her prime, a woman whose worth had faded. But this kiss was not faded. It was fire. It was the thunder that was his namesake. It was brutal and honest, and it demanded everything from her. And without thinking, she responded. Her hands, which had been clenched in her lap, rose and grabbed the front of his shirt, clinging to him. The proper Miss McAllister of Boston was gone. She was a woman in the desert, being kissed as if her life depended on it. A wild, shocking heat flooded her veins, a feeling she thought she was incapable of. She felt as if she had been asleep her entire life and had just been violently shaken awake. He kissed her like she was the only water in the desert. He kissed her like she was the only living thing in a world of ghosts. And Emma McAllister, who had been told she was too old, felt, for one heart-shattering, terrifying moment, like she was 18. She felt beautiful. She felt, for the first time in her entire dutiful life, completely and utterly alive. He pulled back, just an inch. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. His eyes were still blazing, fixed on hers. They stared at each other. The cold night, the vast desert, the dead men, the empty future. It all dissolved. There was only the sound of the fire and their two ragged breaths. Neither of them had been prepared for this. It was a collision, and everything, in that one desperate kiss, had changed. Caleb pulled back, his breath ragged. The silence of the canyon rushed in to fill the space between them, roaring in Emma's ears. His hand was still braced on the rock beside her head, his face inches from hers. The fire in his eyes had not dimmed. It was now mixed with a profound confusion, as if he had just woken from a dream and did not know where he was. He looked at her mouth, then at her eyes, and a shadow of something, perhaps shame or regret, crossed his features. He recoiled. He pushed himself back across the fire in one swift movement, putting the flames between them once more. He sat, turning his shoulders to her, and stared into the darkness beyond the canyon walls. He was a man made of stone again. Emma was left trembling, her lips burning. She raised her fingers, touching them lightly. The kiss had been an earthquake. It had shattered the foundations of who she thought she was. The proper, restrained Miss McAllister of Boston. She had kissed him back. She had clung to him. She had met his hunger with a desperate, buried hunger of her own. She was terrified, not of him, but of the person she had become in that moment. The rest of the night passed in a silence so thick it was almost unbreathable. Emma did not sleep. She watched the man across the fire, his back a rigid, unmoving wall. He was a contradiction, a savage killer who had been gentle, a man of stone who had kissed her with fire, a protector who was, by all the laws she knew, her enemy. She was hopelessly, terrifyingly lost, and not just in the wilderness. When the first gray light of dawn touched the canyon rim, he rose. He kicked dirt onto the fire, extinguishing the last embers. He did not look at her. He just said, "We move." The dynamic between them had changed. The fragile, unspoken truce of rescuer and rescued was gone, replaced by a tense, vibrating awareness. As they rode, she was no longer simply watching a stranger. She was watching the man who had kissed her. She noticed the way his back moved with the horse, the strength in his hands on the reins, the way his gaze constantly swept the horizon, a hawk's gaze, missing nothing. He was still silent, but his silence was no longer empty. It was full of unspoken things. He led her deeper into the mountains, into a land that grew wilder and more beautiful. They left the dry, red rock and climbed into high meadows fringed with pine. The air was cleaner, cooler. He seemed to know every rock, every hidden spring. He was not traveling through this land. He was a part of it. That afternoon, he stopped by a small creek. "Get down," he said. He tethered the horses and walked to the water's edge. Kneeling, he motioned for her to join him. She knelt beside him, the cold from the damp earth seeping through her ruined dress. "Wait," he whispered. She looked at him, confused. Then she followed his gaze to the water. At first, she saw nothing, just water moving over stones, but he was utterly still, his concentration absolute. He was reading the water. Slowly, she began to see what he saw, the flicker of a shadow, the subtle disturbance of a pebble. Trout. They were there, holding steady in the current. He uncoiled a simple line from his pouch, baited with a dried grasshopper. He did not cast it, as she had seen men do in Boston parks. He lowered it, letting the current take it, his hand guiding it with an impossible, practiced patience. His whole body was focused on that single thread. When he pulled the line up, a silver, flashing trout was on the end. He killed it quickly, with a sharp knock to the head. There was no sport in it. There was no cruelty. It was a harvest. It was food. He showed her how to clean it, his larger, rougher hands guiding hers. "You waste nothing," he said, his voice low. "The land gives. You take only what you need. You thank it. This is the law." Emma looked at her hands, covered in fish scales and blood. She thought of the bandits, their greedy, chaotic violence, their waste. They followed no law. This man, this savage, lived by a code stricter than any she had ever known. It was not a law written in books or argued by men in wigs. It was the law of life and death, of respect and necessity. She was beginning to understand that he was not an outlaw. He was a man who lived outside her law, and inside a much older one. That night, they ate the roasted trout. It was the best meal of her life. The fire was small again, a secret in the vast darkness. The kiss from the night before was still between them, an unexploded shell. Emma found herself speaking. The silence had become too much, and the shared meal, the lesson at the creek, had broken something open. "In Boston," she said, her voice quiet, "I played the pianoforte." He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. He did not ask what a pianoforte was. He just listened. "My mother, she loved hearing me play. Chopin. She said it was the only thing that made the house feel warm after—" She trailed off. After the money was gone. After she got sick. She had not intended to say this. The words just came, pulled out of her by the enormous, listening quiet of the wilderness, and the man watching her. "I have not touched one in almost a year. My hands, they do not feel like mine anymore." She looked at them, the broken nails, the ingrained dirt, the fish scales. They sold it to pay a debt. She looked up at him, expecting She did not know what. Indifference, contempt for such a soft, useless memory. Caleb held her gaze. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your hands are strong. They know how to hold on. That is better than music." His words struck her. It was not a compliment. It was a simple statement of fact. He saw strength in her where she had only seen loss. He saw her, the woman she was now, not the faded daughter she had been. "Why do you stay here?" she asked, emboldened. "In these mountains alone. The soldiers, the man at the station, they hunt you." His face hardened, the brief opening closing. "This is my home," he said. "But your family," she ventured, her voice soft. "They are gone. Why not? Go somewhere else. Start a new life." "Go where?" he said, and for the first time, a bitter, sharp anger entered his voice. "To a reservation, to a piece of land they give me, so they can say they are kind. A cage is a cage, even if you call it a new life." He stood up, walking to the edge of the firelight. He looked out at the pines, silvered by the moon. "They took Nolan. They took Taza. They put them in a place, a fort, a place of sickness. My boy, he died of a cough, a white man's cough. My wife!" He stopped. He clenched his fists. "They think they can erase us, put us on a patch of dust and wait for us to die. They think because I am one man, I am defeated." He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with the same fire she had seen during the kiss. "Every day I wake up free, I win. Every time I hunt in my father's mountains, I win. Every breath I take, I am a refusal. I am the man who will not be erased. That is why I stay." Emma's heart ached. She finally understood. His life was not one of simple survival. It was an act of defiance. It was a monument of grief and rage and love, lived every single day. She saw the loneliness in him then. It was a canyon, as deep and as vast as the one they had fled. It was the emptiness of a man who had lost his entire world and had chosen to stand alone in the wreckage rather than kneel. She saw his strength, not just the physical power that had dispatched the bandits, but this deeper, unbending will, and she saw his protection of her in a new light. It was not random. He had saved her because she was a woman, alone and threatened. In that moment, she had been a reflection of the people he could not save. Protecting her was a way of fighting back against the world that had taken everything from him. The next day, a storm rolled in. The blue sky vanished, replaced by a low, bruised ceiling of cloud. The wind howled, and a cold, driving rain began to fall. They were caught on an exposed ridge. "This way!" Caleb yelled over the wind. He grabbed her horse's rein, pulling it, forcing the animal down a steep, treacherous path. Rain turned to sleet, stinging her face. She was soaked in moments, her body shaking with a cold so deep it felt like it was in her bones. She was losing her grip on the reins, her hands numb. "We must stop," she cried. "I cannot—" He did not listen. He pushed on, finally leading them into a shallow cave, a scoop taken out of the rock face, barely deep enough to shelter them and the horses. Emma slid from the saddle, her legs buckling. She would have fallen, but he was there. He caught her, his arms circling her, holding her upright. She was pressed against his chest. He was solid and warm. Even through their wet clothes, his heat was a shock. He held her for a moment, letting her find her balance. "You are strong," he said again, his voice firm, right by her ear. "You will not break." He released her and set to work. He rubbed down the horses, his movements quick and sure. He found a place out of the wind and, with skill that seemed like magic, he managed to spark a tiny fire. They huddled by it, the storm raging outside. They were trapped, together, in a small, dark space. Emma was shaking violently, her teeth chattering. Caleb looked at her, his expression grim. He took the heavy wool blanket from his own bedroll. It was his only one. He unfolded it and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling it tight. "But you," she stammered. "I have stood in worse," he said. He sat close to her, close enough that his body blocked the worst of the wind, his shoulder almost touching hers. They sat there for hours as the storm screamed. The vast, open world of the West had shrunk to this tiny circle of warmth. Emma was wrapped in his blanket, sheltered by his body. The fear was gone. The terror of the bandits, the shock of the kiss, the ache of her old life. It all faded. She was acutely aware of him. His smell, of pine smoke, leather, and rain. The solidness of his presence. He was not a savage. He was not just a protector. He was Caleb, a man who had lost everything, a man who lived by a fierce, private honor. And she, Emma McAllister, who had been shipped west like a piece of freight, was safer here, in a cave with a man hunted by the world, than she had ever been in her life. She leaned her head back against the cold stone, wrapped in his warmth, and slowly, the shaking stopped. She was no longer just surviving. She was with him, and that, she realized with a jolt of terror and wonder, was a choice she was beginning to make. The storm broke at dawn. The world outside the cave was scrubbed new, the air sharp and cold, the scent of wet pine and damp earth rising like a prayer. The sky was a pale, clean blue. Emma woke from a shallow, restless sleep. She was still wrapped in Caleb's blanket. He was already awake, standing at the mouth of the cave, watching the light spread over the canyons. He was a silhouette against the new day. She sat up, her body stiff and aching, but the deep, bone-shaking chill was gone. The small fire was a pile of gray ash. She folded the blanket, the heavy wool still holding a faint trace of his warmth. He heard the movement and turned. His eyes met hers, the fire from their kiss, the shared grief, the intimacy of the storm. It all hung in the air between them, unspoken. He looked at her, a long, assessing gaze. He was checking for breakage. She was pale, her dress a ruined testament to her journey, but her eyes were clear. She had not broken. He nodded, as if to himself. He said they were low on supplies. The fish and dried meat were gone. The horses needed grain. He would have to trade. Emma's heart tightened. Trade meant people. It meant the world she had left behind. She said she would go with him. He looked at her. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, in his eyes. He told her it was not safe. The places he went were not for her. She stood, her posture as straight as she could make it. She told him his world was her world now. She would not be hidden like a child. She would not be a burden. She would see what he saw. He held her gaze for a long moment. He saw the new, hard line of her mouth. This was not the frightened woman from the coach. This was the woman who had sat with him in the storm. He gave a single, sharp nod. He told her to stay close, and to speak to no one. They rode down from the high country, following a trail Emma would never have seen. It was less a path and more a rumor of a path, a line of logic known only to him. After half a day, the pines thinned, and the red rock returned. They descended into a dusty bowl where a shallow, muddy river split in two. It was not a town. It was a place called Two Rivers, a scar of adobe and raw lumber in the vast emptiness. There was a general store, a blacksmith's forge belching black smoke, and a saloon, its doors already open, spilling the tinny sound of a pianoforte into the morning air. That sound, so familiar, hit Emma like a physical blow. Men were everywhere, miners with picks tied to their mules, trappers with bundles of furs, hard-faced men who just watched. They were all armed. They stopped their conversations to look at them, to look at her, a white woman, in rags, riding with an Apache. Emma felt their eyes on her, 1,000 tiny, sharp points. This was not the polite pity of the stagecoach. This was a raw, judging, and hungry look. She felt naked, exposed. Caleb stopped the horses 100 yards from the store. He dismounted. He told her to wait there. His voice was low, hard. He said to keep the horses ready. He gave her the reins. He pulled his rifle from its saddle boot. He did not hand it to her. He pulled the knife from his belt, the one he had used on the bandits. He placed it in her hand, his fingers closing hers around the wooden hilt. He told her to use it if anyone touched her. He did not mean the horse. He walked toward the store. He moved like a wolf, not a man. His body was tense, balanced, his eyes never still. He was a different person here. He was not the quiet man of the mountains. He was the outlaw. He was the warrior. He was thunder. He disappeared inside the store. Emma sat on the horse, the reins in one hand, the knife in the other. Her hand was shaking. The sun was hot. A man stumbled out of the saloon, saw her, and stopped, staring. He grinned, showing broken yellow teeth. He took a step toward her. Emma's hand tightened on the knife. She put her chin up. She stared back at him, her eyes as cold as she could make them. She would not be a victim. Not again. The man hesitated, then spat in the dust and turned back into the saloon. A few minutes later, another man came out of the general store. This one was older, with a graying beard and a dirty apron. He looked nervous. He walked toward her, his hands held up, palms out. He stopped a safe distance away. He asked if she was Miss McAllister. The name was a shock. It was a name from another life. She said nothing, her eyes narrow, the knife grip tight. The man, he said his name was Jedediah, the store owner. He said he meant no harm. He said a message had come from Tucson, from a Mr. Silas Croft. Emma's blood went cold. Jedediah spoke quickly, his words tumbling out. The salesman from the coach, Abernathy. He had made it. He had reached a telegraph station. The news of the attack was everywhere. Mr. Croft knew she had been taken by Black Hawk. The store owner pointed. He said Mr. Croft had men looking for her. He had sent messages to every post, every fort. He was a powerful man, a very powerful man. He had a letter for her. He held it out. It was clean, white, sealed with wax. It had her name, Miss Emma McAllister, written in a strong black hand. She took it, her fingers clumsy. She let the reins fall, the horse standing ground-tied as Caleb had taught her. She slid the knife back into her belt. She broke the seal. She read the letter. My dear Miss McAllister, I have received word of the unfortunate incident regarding your coach. I express my deepest regrets for the inconvenience and distress this must have caused you. The surviving passenger, a Mr. Abernathy, has informed my agents that you were forcibly taken by the Apache outlaw known as Black Hawk. I have, of course, taken measures. A substantial reward has been offered for your safe return. A separate and more significant bounty has been placed on Black Hawk, dead or alive. It is my sincere hope that this matter will be resolved swiftly. My agent, Mr. Malone, is present at the Two Rivers post. I have instructed him to provide you with secure transport to Tucson immediately upon your arrival. He will see to all your needs. Our arrangement stands. I trust you will not be further delayed in fulfilling your obligation. I look forward to welcoming you to my home. Your obedient servant, Silas Croft. Emma read it twice. The world tilted. She felt sick. Inconvenience, obligation, property. He was not looking for a lost bride. He was retrieving a lost possession, and he was hunting the man who had saved her life, dead or alive. This letter was her past, her father's debt, her duty, reaching out from a world of polite parlors and cold contracts to pull her back. She looked at the store. A man stood in the doorway, a tall man in a clean duster coat, his hand on a holstered pistol. He was watching her. Mr. Malone, her safe transport. She looked at the saloon, at the dusty, leering men. She looked at the raw, ugly buildings. This was her world, the world of her own people. She thought of the high meadows. She thought of the trout, eaten by the fire. She thought of the silent, respectful way Caleb had listened to her story of the pianoforte. She thought of his hand, so rough, touching her cheek. She thought of his kiss. This letter was a death warrant. For Caleb, and for her, if she went with this Mr. Malone. She would be Emma McAllister again. She would be the too-old bride, the woman who was pitied, the woman with a story. She would be a possession in the house of Silas Croft. She would be in a cage, a safe, clean, respectable cage where her soul would shrivel and die. The choice was absolute. It was the trading post or the mountains. It was Mr. Croft or Caleb. It was death or life. Caleb came out of the store. He was carrying a heavy burlap sack. He saw her face. He saw the white letter clutched in her hand. He saw the tall man in the doorway. He did not need to be told. He knew. He stopped, 10 feet away from her. The space between them was electric. The entire street was watching. The miners, the trappers, Mr. Malone. Caleb's face was a mask of stone. It was the hardest she had ever seen it. He had known this would come. He was a fool to think it would not. She was from that world. He was not. He spoke. His voice was low, flat. He told her there was a man in the store, an agent for the man she was to marry. He told her the man would take her to Tucson. She would be safe. She would have a good house. She would have fine dresses, like the one she had lost. She would be with her own people. He told her to go. It was the hardest thing he had ever said. It was a lie. He did not want her to go. He wanted to pull her onto his horse and ride back to the high country and never see this place again. But his honor, his deep, fierce belief in freedom, demanded he give her the choice. To force her to stay would make him the same as Silas Croft. It would make him a man who kept a person in a cage. Emma looked at him. She saw the betrayal in his eyes. He thought she would leave. He was offering her the escape. He was cutting himself open to let her go. She looked at Mr. Malone, who was now taking a step toward her, a polite, possessive smile on his face. She looked at the letter, her obligation. She looked back at Caleb, at his stone face and his agonized eyes. She made her choice. She walked forward, her boots sinking in the deep dust. She walked past Mr. Malone, who stopped, his smile faltering. She walked until she was standing directly in front of Caleb. She held up the letter, Silas Croft's letter. Caleb stared at it. He did not take it. Emma let it fall from her fingers. The white paper, her contract, her past, landed in the filth of the road. She looked up at his face. Her voice was steady. It was a new voice, forged in the desert. She told him her world was not in Tucson. She told him her world was not in a fine house. She said she had been in a cage her whole life. She would not go back. She told him his home was in the mountains. She asked him to take her home. Caleb's breath hitched. He had prepared for her rejection. He had prepared for his loss. He was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for her to choose him, to choose his world. A slow, fierce, dangerous light began to burn in his eyes. It was the return of a thing he had thought was dead forever. Hope. He looked down at the letter in the dust. He looked up at Mr. Malone, whose face was now dark with anger. Caleb reached out. He did not touch her face. He put his hand on her arm, his grip firm. It was not a question. It was an answer. He turned her, his hand on her back, and walked her to her horse. He lifted her into the saddle. He swung onto his own horse, the sack of supplies in one hand, the reins in the other. He turned to face Mr. Malone. His hand did not move toward his rifle. He did not need it to. His gaze was enough. It was a promise. Mr. Malone did not move. Caleb turned his horse. He kicked his heels, and the horse moved. Emma followed. Together. They rode out of Two Rivers. They rode past the saloon, past the staring men, past the edge of the white man's world. They rode toward the high, free, silent mountains. Emma McAllister did not look back. The ride out of Two Rivers was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was not the empty, waiting silence of the desert, nor the tense, questioning silence that had followed their kiss. This was a shared silence, a bond forged in a public act of defiance. Emma had chosen. She had dropped the letter, her past, into the dust, and had taken his arm. She had chosen him. Caleb pushed the pace. He did not speak, but his body was a wire drawn tight. He led them not back to the high meadows they had shared, but on a new, more desperate path, angling deeper into the broken, trackless maze of canyons. He was not just hiding anymore. He was running. Emma stayed with him. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The world had been simplified. Behind her was a life that was a lie, a cage of polite words and cold obligations, represented by a man who would hunt another for a substantial reward. Ahead of her was this man, this mystery, this truth. He was all she had. That night, their fire was no fire at all. They ate cold, dry rations from his new supplies, huddled in a fissure of rock so deep the moon could not find them. "You should not have done that," he said, his voice low, a gravelly rasp in the dark. Emma, who was checking a raw spot on her horse's back, looked over at him. "Done what?" "At the post, the letter, the man, Malone." "I would not go with him," she said simply. "You do not understand," Caleb said. He stood and walked to the mouth of the narrow canyon, staring out at the sliver of starry sky. "Before, I was a ghost, a rumor, a man they hunted because it was their job, and because of my past." He turned back to her, his face a landscape of shadows. "Now, you have made it a personal matter. This man, Croft, he is a man of power. He will not see a woman defy him. He will not see his property taken. And you, a white woman, chose an Apache over him, over his agent, over your own kind." He let the words hang. "He will not stop. He will send the army. He will send the hunters. He will pay any price. You did not just choose me, Emma. You chose this. The hunt. You painted a target on your own back, and on mine." "Then we will run," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. His laugh was a short, bitter sound. "We cannot run. We can only hide. And now, the whole territory is a trap." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "He will use the attack on the stagecoach. He will say, I am not just an outlaw. He will say I am a raider, a killer of civilians. He will twist the story. And the soldiers, they will have their excuse. They will not be hunting a man. They will be pacifying a threat. They have been looking for an excuse to clean out these hills. You have given it to them." A cold dread, deeper than any she had yet felt, settled in Emma's stomach. Her choice had not just been about her. It had been about him. She had, in her act of freedom, perhaps doomed them both. "What do we do?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long time. "There is a place. I had not thought to go back. It is far south, a place of deep canyons, hidden by the earth. A sanctuary. Some of my people are still there, those who have refused the reservations, those who live as I do." He paused. "It is our last place. If we can reach it, we can live. Not just hide, live." He looked at her again, and his gaze was heavy. "It will be a hard ride, and they are already behind us." He was right. They saw the patrol 2 days later. They were high on a ridge, looking down into a wide, shallow basin. A column of dust rose in the distance. It was not a stagecoach. It was too large. Caleb pulled her and the horses behind a screen of shattered granite. He took a small-looking glass, a thing of brass and lenses he must have traded for, from his saddlebag. He lay flat on the rock, inching forward, and watched. Emma lay beside him, her heart a cold hammer in her chest. Soldiers, he said, his voice a low hiss. Blue coats, a dozen, and others. The hunters. I see Malone, the man from the store. Emma's blood ran cold. Mr. Malone, her safe transport. He was with them. This was not a rumor. This was a fact. They were being hunted. They are moving fast, Caleb said, his eyes still pressed to the glass. They are on our trail, but they are moving too fast. They are not following our tracks. They are anticipating. He was quiet. Then he swore, a low, sharp word in his own tongue. What is it? Emma whispered. They are not following us, he said, his voice flat and dead. They are moving on the old camp, by the Sweetwater. A camp, your camp. No, he said, and his face was grim. A family, Quieto, his wife, his 2 children. They hunt there in the summers. Malone, that store owner. They must know. They are not hunting me. They are hunting any Apache. They are using Quieto to draw me out. Or perhaps they do not care which of us they find. He slid back from the rock, his face a mask of cold fury. They think we are all the same. What will they do? Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. What they always do, he said. He looked at her, his eyes full of the old, cold grief she had seen that first night. They will pacify them. Emma's mind reeled. A family, children. This was not a war. It was an extermination. The polite, civilized world of Silas Croft, the world of contracts and inconvenience, was a lie. This was the truth. This was the engine that ran that world. We have to help them, she said, grabbing his arm. No. His voice was iron. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up. They are too many, and they are between us and Quieto. If we ride down there, we die. Quieto, he is a warrior. He will know what to do. He will run. But the children. He will run, Caleb repeated, his voice harsh, and he pulled her toward the horses. And so will we. We go south, now, while they are busy with him. The coldness of it shocked her. He was abandoning them. This man, who had saved her, was leaving his own people to die. He saw the look on her face, the judgment, the horror. He grabbed her, his fingers biting into her shoulders. He pulled her close, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing with a grief and rage so profound it stunned her. Do you think I do not want to help? He hissed. Do you think my heart is not torn from my chest? That is my brother down there. He shook her. Once. I lost Nalin. I lost Taza. I will not lose you. I cannot fight them. Emma, not all of them. But I can save you. I will not let them have you. I will not let them do to you what they did to my wife. Do you understand me? The raw, agonizing honesty of his words broke through her shock. This was not coldness. This was a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. He was choosing her. He was choosing the living, the future, over a battle he could not win. Now we ride, he'd said, releasing her, and we do not look back. He led her on a punishing, desperate flight. They rode south along the spines of ridges, through narrow canyons, keeping to the rock and the high, hard ground where they left no trail. Emma's body screamed. Her legs were raw from the saddle, her mind numb with exhaustion and horror. But she kept riding. She kept up. She was the woman whose hands knew how to hold on. Late in the afternoon, they had to cross a high divide. For a moment, they were exposed, with the basin where Quieto's camp had been spread out below them, miles distant but terribly clear in the dry air. A smudge of smoke rose from the trees by the Sweetwater. It was not a campfire. It was too thick, too black. It was the smoke of a burning home. Emma stopped, her horse pulling at the bit. She looked at the smoke. Emma, do not, Caleb said, his voice tight. She looked, she saw it all. The injustice, the brutality, the lie of her entire life. These men, the soldiers, Mr. Malone, the men of her world. They were the savages. They were the ones who burned homes, who hunted children. Caleb was not the outlaw. He was the one who was obeying the true law, the law of the land, the law of family, the law that said you protected what you loved. He was not the darkness. He was the only light she had found in this entire, terrible country. A cold, hard rage, a feeling she had never known, settled in her heart. It was not a hot, flashing anger. It was a cold, pure certainty. She had chosen him at the trading post, out of a desperate instinct for freedom. Now, she chose him again. She chose him with her whole soul. She was not a passenger he was rescuing. She was his, he was hers. They were one. She turned her horse. She looked at him. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes were clear. They were as hard as his. "Take me home," she said. It was not a request. It was a statement. Caleb looked at her. He saw the change. He saw the fire in her eyes, the steel in her spine. She was not a white woman. She was not a Boston lady. She was a woman of the people, forged in the desert, baptized in their shared grief. He gave a single nod. He turned his horse south, toward the hidden sanctuary. "We ride," he said, and together they flew, leaving the smoke and the lies behind them, riding for their one last chance at life. They rode for 3 days, a blur of sun and shadow, dust and exhaustion. The world was reduced to the heaving flanks of the horse beneath her, the rigid line of Caleb's back in front of her, and the aching, burning need to keep moving. They spoke little, ate less. They drank from the canteens, watering the horses at muddy seeps that Caleb found in the rock, places a white man would have passed without seeing. Emma's body was a single, throbbing ache. The woman from Boston was long gone. Her skin was burned dark by the sun, her hair a matted tangle, her dress in tatters. But her hands on the reins were steady. Her eyes, like his, constantly scanned the horizon. She had learned to read the land, to see the subtle signs. He saw a displaced stone, the warning cry of a hawk, the way the wind moved through the grass. She was no longer a passenger. She was his partner. On the evening of the 3rd day, when Emma thought she could not stay in the saddle for one more minute, he stopped. They were in a high, barren plain of fractured rock. It looked like the end of the world. "We are here," he said. Emma looked around. There was nothing, just rock and sky, and the howling of the wind. "Where?" He dismounted and led his horse forward. She followed. He walked directly toward what looked like a solid wall of rock. As they drew closer, she saw it a crack, a narrow, deep fissure in the earth, barely wide enough for a single horse. It was invisible until they were directly upon it. He led his horse into the darkness. Emma's horse shied, but she urged it forward, her heart pounding. They descended a steep, winding path, the canyon walls rising up to blot out the sky. It was dark and cool. After several minutes, the path widened, and she heard the sound of a stream and the low murmur of voices. They emerged into a hidden world. The canyon floor was a strip of impossible green, 100 yards wide and perhaps a mile long. A clear stream ran through it, lined with cottonwood trees. Small, neat wickiups made of brush and hide were nestled against the canyon walls. Horses grazed in a pasture fenced with mesquite. Smoke rose from a dozen small, contained fires. It was a village, a sanctuary. An old man, his face a map of deep lines, stepped out to meet them, a rifle in his hands. Other figures emerged from the shadows. Warriors, women, children. Their faces were hard, suspicious. They looked at Caleb, and then their eyes, dark and hostile, fell on Emma. Caleb spoke to the old man in their tongue. His voice was firm, respectful. He told their story. Emma did not understand the words, but she heard the names Quieto, Malone, soldiers. He gestured to her. He said her name, Emma. Then he said something else. a phrase that made the old man's eyes widen. "She is my wife. She has the heart of the people." The old man looked at Emma. He looked at her tattered dress, her burned skin, her steady gaze that did not falter under his scrutiny. He looked at the bandit's rifle still in her saddle scabbard. He nodded, slowly. He said a word of welcome. They were given food, a stew of rabbit and roots, and water from the stream. An older woman, her face kind but etched with sadness, showed Emma to a small wickiup where she could rest. For the first time in weeks, Emma was in a place that felt like a home. She was surrounded by people, a community. They were hunted, they were a remnant, but they were together. For 2 days, they rested. The canyon was a pocket of peace. Caleb was in constant counsel with the old man, whose name was Taza, named for Caleb's lost son, or perhaps the other way round. The warriors posted sentries at the canyon rim, but the mood was calm. Emma helped the women, grinding mesquite beans into flour, mending hides. They taught her with hand gestures and a few shared Spanish words. They were shy, but kind. They had seen the way Caleb looked at her. They accepted her. She was washing her face in the stream, the cold water a shock. When the world ended, it was not a warning. It was an explosion. A single rifle shot, magnified by the canyon walls, echoing like thunder. A woman who had been gathering reeds by the stream cried out, a high, thin sound, and fell. Then the gunfire erupted. It was not a battle, it was an ambush. Emma looked up. The rim of the canyon, which had been their protection, was now their prison. Blue-coated soldiers were lined along the edge, kneeling, firing down into the village. They were ants on a hilltop, dispensing death, and with them, she saw him, the man in the clean duster coat, Mr. Malone. He was not shooting. He was pointing, directing the fire. "Emma!" Caleb's voice was a roar. He was running toward her from the wickiups, his rifle in his hand. "To the caves! Get to the caves!" Panic. People were screaming, running for the shallow caves and overhangs that dotted the canyon walls. The Apache warriors, no more than 20 of them, were grabbing their rifles, trying to find cover, trying to fire back at an enemy they could barely see. It was hopeless. They were trapped in a bowl, and the soldiers were pouring fire down from above. Caleb grabbed Emma, shoving her toward the largest cave, where the women and children were scrambling. "Stay here, do not move," he commanded. His face was a terrible mask of fury and despair. This was his home, his sanctuary, and he had led the wolves to it. He turned to join the fighters. The old man, Taza, was already down, lying still by his wickiup. Caleb and a handful of other men took cover behind a jumble of boulders near the stream, returning fire, trying to give the non-combatants time to hide. Emma huddled in the back of the cave, her body pressed against the cold stone. She was surrounded by whimpering children and women who were weeping silently, their faces rigid with a grief she now understood. This was their life. This was the end they had always known was coming. She looked out. She saw the soldiers, methodical, their rifles spitting smoke and lead. She saw Malone, standing like a general, directing his pacification. He was destroying this last, hidden place. He was finishing the job. And she saw Caleb. He was exposed. He was firing, moving, drawing their attention, his body a flash of buckskin and desperate courage. He was trying to protect the caves. He was trying to protect her. Her greatest fear was not the bullets. It was not death. It was capture. It was the thought of Mr. Malone, or men like him, dragging her back to Silas Croft's world. A world she now hated, a world built on this, and her other, greater fear, a fear that was a cold sickness in her stomach, was watching Caleb die, watching him fall, like the woman by the stream, losing him. She saw a soldier on the rim, separate from the others. He was not firing into the village. He was lying flat, taking his time. He was a sharpshooter. He was slowly, carefully, bringing his rifle to bear on the boulders where Caleb was fighting. Malone was beside him, pointing. He was identifying the target. He was sentencing Caleb to death. The world went silent. Emma's breath stopped. Caleb was reloading. His back was turned for a moment. He was a perfect, still target. The women in the cave were praying, a low, keening chant. Emma looked at her hands, the hands that had played Chopin, the hands that had cleaned the trout, the hands that Caleb had held. His fingers closed around the hilt of a knife. The bandit's rifle was lying near the mouth of the cave, where one of the women had dropped it. Emma moved. She was not thinking. She was acting. She was the woman who knew how to hold on. She crawled to the mouth of the cave, grabbed the rifle, and scrambled back into the shadows. Her hands were shaking, but she knew what to do. Caleb had shown her, on their long ride, how to check the load, how to cock the hammer. "You waste nothing," he had said. She pushed the heavy barrel onto a low ledge of rock, bracing it. She looked up. The soldier was still there, settling his aim. "I will not let them have you," Caleb had said to her. "I will not let them have you," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She put her eye to the sight. The distance was incredible. He was a tiny figure. She did not aim for him. She aimed for the rock just beside his head. She remembered Caleb's stillness at the creek. She let out her breath. She became very, very still. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the explosion deafening in the small cave. The smoke blinded her for a second. On the rim, the soldier jerked as if stung, his shot going wild. Her bullet had struck the rock, shattering it, sending fragments into his face. He cried out, rolling away from the edge. Malone spun, looking down, his face a mask of disbelief. He was looking for the source of the shot. Down below, the shot had broken the spell. Caleb had spun, his rifle loaded. He saw the soldier on the rim clutch his face. He saw Malone, exposed. He looked toward the cave. He saw her. She was in the shadows, the rifle still in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. He saw her face, pale but set, her eyes blazing with a cold, protective fury. She was not hiding. She was not a victim. She was fighting. She was fighting for him, for them, for their freedom. His heart, which he had thought was dead, which he had thought was a stone, broke open. "Emma!" he roared, a sound of anguish and terrible, fierce pride. Malione saw her too. He pointed, his mouth open, screaming something she could not hear. The soldiers on the rim turned their fire, a hail of bullets striking the rock face around the cave. Emma scrambled back, stone chips stinging her face. The fight was not over. It had just begun. They were trapped. The soldiers would come down. The night would be a nightmare. But they were facing it together. Emma McAllister, the too-old bride, had just fired her first shot in a war she had never known existed, and she had done it for the man she loved. The world dissolved into a thunder of concentrated gunfire. The rocks at the mouth of the cave exploded, sending razor-sharp splinters flying. Emma pressed herself flat, her ears ringing, her face stinging from stone dust. The soldiers on the rim, directed by Malone, were pouring all their fire onto her position. She was pinned, trapped. The women and children behind her were screaming. A high, thin sound of pure terror. She looked out, through the smoke. She saw Caleb. He was still behind the boulders, but he was looking at her, at the cave. He saw the concentrated fire. He knew what it meant. They were trying to bury her in the rock. He roared, a sound of pure, untranslatable rage. It was not a word. It was the cry of a man watching the last thing he loved being destroyed. He stood up from behind the rocks. It was a deliberate, suicidal act. "Here!" he yelled, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, a challenge to the men on the rim. "I am the one you want. I am Black Hawk." He fired his rifle, once, twice, 3 times, as fast as he could work the lever. He was drawing their fire, pulling their attention away from the cave, away from Emma. And it worked. The hail of bullets shifted, a curtain of lead and death sweeping from the cave mouth to his position. The boulders he was using for cover were pulverized. Chips of granite flew like shrapnel. "Caleb, no!" Emma screamed, her voice lost in the din. He was moving, firing, a magnificent, terrible target. He was a warrior of his people, making his last stand. He was buying her time. The other Apache warriors, inspired by his courage, rose from their own cover, adding their few rifles to the fight, a last defiant cry against the dying of the light. But it was hopeless. One by one, they fell. And then Caleb stumbled. He did not fall, he stumbled, his hand going to his side. A dark, wet stain bloomed on his buckskin shirt. He had been hit. He staggered, caught himself against a rock, and raised his rifle one more time. He fired, but the shot was weak. Another bullet struck him, this one high in the chest. The impact spun him around. He dropped his rifle. He looked, his expression not of pain, but of a terrible, vast surprise. He looked toward the cave. His eyes searched for her. He found her. He held her gaze for one, heart-stopping second. Then his legs buckled, and he collapsed, falling into the open, unprotected space between the boulders and the stream. He lay still. The shooting stopped. A terrible, ringing silence fell over the canyon. It was broken only by the weeping of the children in the cave and a single, triumphant yell from the rim. "He is down." It was Malone's voice. "He is down, cease fire. We go down. I want him alive. If you can, the reward is double for alive." Emma watched, frozen. Her mind was a white, blank page of horror. He was gone. They had killed him. She saw the soldiers on the rim begin to move, running toward the path that led down into the canyon. They would be down in minutes. They would come for him. They would come for her. The women in the cave were huddled, paralyzed by grief and fear. One of the older women, the one who had given Emma the stew, looked at her. Her eyes were black with despair. She said a single word in her tongue, a word that needed no translation. "Run." Yes, run. That was the logical thing. The only thing. Stay hidden. Wait until they were busy with the bodies. Then slip away in the darkness, which was now beginning to bleed into the sky, the sun a red smear on the western rim. "Run! Save herself!" But she could not move. Her eyes were fixed on the still form in the dust, the man who had given her water, the man who had taught her to see, the man who had kissed her like she was fire, the man who had just died for her. He had not left her. He had never left her. "I will not leave you," she whispered, the words a raw tear in her throat. She looked at the women. She grabbed the old woman's arm. Her voice was a harsh, commanding whisper, a voice she did not recognize. "The stream," she said, pointing to the water that ran through the canyon. "Take the children. Go into the stream, into the darkness. Go down, away from the path. Hide, scatter, now, go." The woman stared at her. Then a spark of understanding, of hope, lit her eyes. She nodded. She began to gather the others, pushing them, herding them like frightened deer, out of the back of the cave, down the bank, and into the cold, shallow water that led toward the dark, unknown end of the canyon. A diversion. Emma did not go with them. She took a last look at the rifle she had fired. It was too large, too slow. She took the knife from her belt, the knife Caleb had given her. Its hilt was smooth, familiar. She took a deep breath. She was Emma McAllister. She was 28 years old. She was a failure from Boston. She was a woman who had been property. She was a woman who had been afraid. She was not afraid anymore. She ran out of the cave. She burst into the twilight, a ghost in her tattered dress, running on the blood-soaked ground. She ran past the bodies of the Apache warriors, past the smoldering wickiups. She ran toward Caleb. A shout went up. "There she is, the woman!" The first of the soldiers were on the canyon floor now. Mr. Malone with them, his pistol drawn. They had not expected this. They had expected a cowering victim. They saw a fury. "Stop her!" Malone yelled. "Do not shoot Croft wants her." Two soldiers, their blue coats dark in the dimming light, ran to intercept her. They were grinning. This was an easy capture. Emma did not slow down. She was not a fighter. She had no skill, but she had the memory of his law. You waste nothing. She had his knife, and she had a rage as cold and as pure as the mountain stars. The first soldier reached for her, his hand open, to grab her arm. She did not dodge. She ran at him. She drove the knife, her entire body behind it, upward, into his arm, into the soft place where it met his body. He screamed, a high, shocked sound, and staggered back, clutching his ruined shoulder. The second soldier, his grin gone, raised his rifle butt to strike her. Emma was too close. She ducked under his swing, her free hand grabbing his rifle barrel, and drove her shoulder into his stomach. He grunted, stumbling off balance. She didn't stop to fight. She just pushed past him, breaking free. She was a whirlwind, a desperate, focused, unstoppable force. She reached Caleb. He was on his back, his eyes half open. Blood was everywhere. There was a terrible, bubbling wound in his chest. He was dying. "Emma!" he gasped, his voice a wet whisper. He tried to push her away. "Run! Leave me!" "Be quiet," she sobbed, dropping the knife and grabbing the front of his shirt. "I am not leaving you. You did not leave me." She tried to pull him. He was a dead weight, a ton of rock. "I cannot walk," he breathed. "You will," she commanded. She was crying now, tears of rage and terror. "You will." She hooked her arms under his, trying to drag him. It was hopeless. He was too heavy. Behind her, she heard Malone shouting, his voice tight with fury. "Get her now!" The soldiers were coming. She had seconds. "See!" "Where?" she screamed at him, shaking his body. "Where is the other way, the sanctuary? You said there was another way." His head lolled, but his eyes focused, just for a second. He looked past her, toward the canyon wall, where the stream they had fished in disappeared into a dark, water-carved hole. "The stream," he gasped. "The cave. It leads out high." She understood. She grabbed him again, this time with a strength born of pure, final desperation. She pulled. He groaned, a sound of agony. But somehow, he found a last spark. He got his legs under him, just enough. She was half carrying, half dragging him. He was stumbling, leaving a thick trail of blood. They were moving, 10 feet, 20 feet, toward the dark mouth of the water tunnel. "Stop them!" Malone's voice was closer. He was there. He stepped in front of them, blocking their path. His face was a mask of cold, civilized fury. His pistol was level, pointed not at her, but at Caleb's head. "It is over, Miss McAllister," he said, his voice calm. "You have caused enough trouble. Step away from the Indian. You are coming with me, Mr. Croft will be displeased, but he will be glad to have his property returned." Emma froze. She was holding Caleb up. He was sagging against her. They were trapped. "I am not his property," Emma spat, her voice venomous. "No," Malone smiled. "You are nothing. You are a woman who ran off with a savage. You have no name. You have no honor. You have nothing. But he has a bounty." He cocked the hammer of his pistol. Caleb moved. It was the last thing he had. He used all his remaining strength, not to fight, but to save her. He shoved Emma. He pushed her, hard, away from him, toward the dark opening of the stream cave. She stumbled, falling to her knees. At the same time, he lunged forward, at Malone. He was not fast. He was a dying man. But he was a warrior. His lunge took Malone by surprise. He grabbed Malone's gun hand, his bloody fingers locking on the man's wrist. Malone shouted in surprise and rage. The pistol went off, the shot deafening, the bullet plowing harmlessly into the mud. "Run!" Caleb roared at Emma. "Run!" Malone, in a panic, tore his arm free and fired again, this time pressing the barrel directly against Caleb's stomach. Caleb grunted, the impact lifting him off his feet. He fell, his grip finally broken. He collapsed at Malone's feet. Emma screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure loss. Malone turned, his gun hand slick with Caleb's blood, his face triumphant. He raised the pistol toward her. But she was not running. She was not cowering. When Caleb had shoved her, she had fallen. When she had fallen, her hand had landed on a rock, a sharp, heavy stone from the stream bed. As Malone raised his gun, Emma rose. She was on her feet, and she threw the rock with all the strength in her body. It struck Malone square in the face. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. He shrieked, dropping his pistol, his hands flying to his ruined nose. He staggered back, blind with pain. The other soldiers were coming, but they were still yards away, confused in the deep twilight. That was her moment, her only moment. She did not run from them. She ran back to Caleb. He was on the ground, unmoving. "No," she sobbed. She grabbed him. "No!" She pulled. He was just a body. But she pulled. She dragged him, backward, her heels digging into the mud and gravel. She dragged him into the stream. She dragged him into the black, cold, watery mouth of the cave. The soldiers reached the entrance. They fired into the darkness. The bullets sparked off the rock walls, whining into the black, but they were gone. Emma was in the dark, in the cold, rushing water, dragging the man she loved. She was sobbing, stumbling, her lungs on fire. She was pulling his body through the water, over the slick rocks. She was running, not for her life, but for his. She was running through the cold, dark veins of the earth, away from the gunfire, away from the hate, carrying the last broken remnant of her new world. She did not know if he was alive or dead. She only knew she would not let them have him. The darkness was absolute. It was not just the absence of light. It was a cold, pressing weight, filled with the roar of unseen water. The bullets from the soldiers stopped, their echoes dying in the black. There was only the sound of the stream, rushing over stone, and the desperate, ragged sound of Emma's own breathing. She was half carrying, half dragging Caleb. The water was shockingly cold, numbing her legs, sucking at her tattered dress. It was sometimes shallow, barely over her ankles, and sometimes it dropped, pulling her down to her waist, the current trying to rip him from her grasp. "Caleb," she sobbed, her voice a raw sound that the darkness swallowed. "Hold on, just hold on." He was a dead weight, a terrible, heavy burden. She did not know if he was alive. His blood was warm on her hands, slick in the cold water. She kept moving, following the stream. One hand braced against the slimy rock wall, the other fisted in the front of his shirt, pulling. Her shoulders were on fire, her lungs burning, but she did not stop. She was a machine. She was a refusal. She had no idea how long she moved. Time was gone. There was only the next step, the next pull. The tunnel twisted, turned. At one point, she stumbled, her foot catching on a submerged rock. She went down, pulling him with her. His head went under the water. "No!" she screamed, finding a desperate, animal strength. She hauled him up, sputtering, choking, and he coughed. It was a weak, wet, rattling sound, but it was a cough. He was alive. That small, terrible sound was a trumpet blast. It gave her a new, frantic surge of energy. "You are alive," she whispered. A prayer, a command. "You will not die. I will not let you." She moved on, the water growing shallower. The tunnel began to slope upward. She was climbing now, pulling him up a cascade of small, smooth waterfalls. It was in agony. Her hands were raw, her nails broken. Then she saw it. A light. Not a light, but a lessening of the dark. A faint, pale grayness. High above. The end of the tunnel. It was a chimney, a vertical shaft of rock with a stream trickling down it. It was steep, but there were holds, ledges. It was a climb she would have thought impossible. Now, it was her only choice. "See, you have to help me," she panted, her face close to his. She slapped his cheek. "Caleb, wake up! Help me!" His eyes fluttered. He groaned. "Emma, help me climb," she ordered. She was not asking. She pushed him, turning him, getting his body against the rock face. "Use your legs." Somehow, he did. He was a broken man, but the warrior's instinct was still there. He pushed. She pulled. They climbed. It was a nightmare of slipping, grating, sobbing effort. She put her body under his, pushing him up from ledge to ledge, her own feet finding holds she could not see. They reached the top. It was an opening, a fissure in the rock, hidden by a curtain of ancient, dry brush. She tore her way through it, pulling him after her, and they collapsed onto a wide, flat ledge of stone, high on the canyon wall. They were out. They were free. The sun was gone. The stars were out, thick and cold. Far below, in the canyon, she could see the tiny, flickering lights of the soldiers' campfires. They were down there. They had taken the village, but they were not up here. They would not find this place. This was the escape route, the one he had known. Emma lay on the stone, gasping, her body a single, vast ocean of pain. She had done it. She had saved him. For a moment, she let the relief wash over her. Then the cold, hard reality returned. He was dying. She crawled to him. In the faint starlight, she could see the damage. It was worse than she had thought. His shirt was a solid mass of drying blood. The wound in his side was a deep, black tear. The one in his chest was bubbling. And the one from Malone's pistol. She could not bring herself to look at it closely. It was a dark, awful hole in his stomach. He was shivering, his skin cold and clammy. "No," she said. She grabbed her tattered skirt, the last remnant of her Boston life, and ripped a long strip from it. She ripped another, and another. She looked at his wounds. She had no water, but for the stream, she had no medicine. She remembered what he had taught her. You waste nothing. She remembered what she had seen the Apache women do. She crawled to the edge of the ledge, where moss and tough mountain plants grew in the cracks. She gathered handfuls of the dry, stringy moss. She found a patch of broad, flat leaves she had seen the old woman use for poultices. She went back to him. "This will hurt, Caleb," she whispered, though she did not know if he could hear her. "I am sorry, but I will not let you go." She cleaned the wounds as best she could with strips of her dress, her touch surprisingly gentle, her hands steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, focused will. She packed the wounds with the moss, as she had seen done, to staunch the bleeding. She bound them tightly with the cloth strips. He groaned, his body arching in agony, even in his unconsciousness. "I know," she whispered, her tears falling hot onto his cold face. "I know, but you will live. You will live." She covered him with his own blanket, which was still tied to the back of his saddle. No, his saddle was gone. The horses were gone. Everything was gone. She lay down beside him, on the cold rock, and pulled him against her, trying to give him her own body heat. She wrapped her arms around him, holding the broken pieces of him together, and she listened to the faint, shallow rasp of his breath, a tiny flutter against the vast, cold silence of the night. For 3 days, they stayed on that ledge. 3 days and 3 nights. It was a lifetime. Caleb did not wake. He fell into a deep fever. his body burning, his mind lost in a dark, red place. He cried out, not in English, but in his own tongue. He said her name, Nalin. He said his son's name, Taza. And he said Emma. Emma did not leave his side. She was his anchor. She was his wall against the darkness. She found a tiny seep of water, dripping from the rock. She soaked a piece of cloth in it and wet his lips, letting the water trickle into his mouth. She was starving. Her own body was screaming in protest. Her shoulder, where she had been hit by rock splinters, was a dull, throbbing fire. On the second day, she found a snare, an old one, left by an Apache hunter months, or years, before. The leather was dry, but the mechanism was simple. She took it. She remembered watching him. She found a faint animal trail, a place where rabbits moved. She set the snare. The next morning, a small, thin rabbit was in it. She cried when she saw it. She killed it, as he had killed the trout, with a quick, hard blow. She had his knife. She skinned it. She could not build a fire. The smoke would be a beacon. She ate the meat raw. The taste was metallic. Awful, but it was life. She chewed a piece of it, softening it, and pressed the small, wet morsel past Caleb's cracked, fevered lips. She was keeping them alive. She, Emma McAllister, who had played Chopin, was keeping them alive with raw meat and moss on a high rock ledge, with an army of killers in the canyon below. On the third night, the fever broke. His burning skin grew cooler. His breathing, which had been fast and shallow, deepened. On the morning of the fourth day, he opened his eyes. He looked at her. He was weak, his eyes clouded with pain, but he was there. He saw her. He saw her face, smudged with dirt and his own blood, her hair a wild, tangled nest, her lips chapped and bleeding. "Emma," he whispered. His voice was a dry leaf. "I am here," she said, her voice breaking. She touched his face, her hand trembling. "I am here. You are safe." He looked at the bandages on his chest, the strange poultice of leaves. He looked at the skin of the rabbit, drying on the rock. He looked at the knife in her belt. He understood. "You fought," he whispered. "I fought," she said. "You saved me." "You saved me first," she said. A faint, small smile touched his lips. It was the first smile she had ever seen on his face. It was a thing of terrible, heartbreaking beauty. "We are," he breathed, "a matched pair." He closed his eyes, slipping back into a healing sleep. Emma watched him, her heart an aching, overflowing thing. The relationship they had, it was no longer a matter of rescuer and victim. It was not a matter of choice. It was a fact. It was a law of the land. Like the mountains, like the stream, they were a matched pair. They were found 2 days later. Emma was setting her snare again when she heard a sound, a pebble, skittering. She grabbed her knife, her heart leaping into her throat. She flattened herself against the rock. A face appeared over the ledge. Not a soldier. It was the old Apache woman, the one who had given her the stew. Her face was streaked with grief, but she was alive. She was not alone. Behind her were a dozen others. The women, the children, and 3 warriors who had survived. They had done as Emma had said. They had followed the stream, hidden, and then, when the soldiers had finally left, they had climbed the escape route, looking for them. The old woman looked at Emma, this white woman, alone, gaunt, holding a knife. Then she looked past her, to the ledge, where Caleb was sleeping, bandaged. The old woman's eyes filled with a new, strange light. It was not pity, it was not suspicion. It was a profound, absolute respect. She walked to Emma. She was the healer of the people. She put her hand, wrinkled and strong, on Emma's shoulder. She said nothing, but in that touch, Emma was no longer an outsider. She was no longer a white woman. She was a warrior. She was a healer. She was one of them. She had lost her past, her home, her name. She had lost everything she had ever been, and in the high, cold, lonely desert, surrounded by a broken people, holding the hand of a man who had come back from the dead, Emma McAllister, for the first time in her entire life, was finally, truly, home. The old woman, whose name was Ishta, knelt by Caleb's side. She looked at the work Emma had done, the crude moss packing, the bandages torn from a fine lady's dress. Her face, a web of deep, ancient lines, was unreadable. She looked at Emma, this pale, starving woman with a warrior's fire in her eyes. Then she nodded, a single, sharp gesture of approval. They did not move him for 2 more days. Ishta took charge of his healing, but she did not push Emma aside. Instead, she taught her, she made Emma her apprentice. She showed her which leaves to chew into a poultice to draw out the fever, which roots to boil, which moss truly stopped the bleeding. Emma learned. Her hands, which had once bled from playing the pianoforte, now learned to grind herbs on a stone, to apply a dressing with a touch that was both firm and infinitely gentle. The other survivors, 3 warriors and a handful of women and children, made a hidden camp on the high ledge. They were a broken, grieving remnant. They had lost their homes, their families, their leader, but they were alive. And they had their healer, and they had this strange, fierce white woman who had, against all odds, saved Caleb Blackhawk. Caleb's journey back was a long, dark passage. The wounds were deep, his body ravaged by fever. He woke, he slept. He was a man drowning in a red sea of pain and memory. He remembered the soldiers, the fire, the look on Malone's face. He remembered Kieto's camp, the smoke, the burning. He remembered his sanctuary, his last, hidden place, being violated, destroyed. He had failed. He had led the death to his people. He had lost everything. Again. In this darkness, there was one constant light. Emma. She was there when he woke, her face pale and smudged, offering him water. She was there in the fever dreams, her cool hand on his forehead, her voice a low, steady murmur. She was not a dream. She was real. He watched her. He was too weak to speak, but he watched. He saw her moving through the small camp. He saw her take the rifle, the bandit's rifle, and go with the 3 warriors. He saw her return hours later, empty-handed, her face set in a mask of frustration. He saw her go out again the next day, and the next. He saw her, a week later, return with 2 rabbits, her own kill. He saw her bring them to the fire, skin them with a practiced, steady hand, and share the meat. He saw the respect the other women gave her. He saw the warriors treat her not as a captive, not as a woman, but as a partner. Her strength was a quiet, steady thing. It was not his, a warrior's fire. It was the strength of the mountain, the strength that endured, the strength that simply was. She did not weep. She did not complain. She did not despair. She worked. She hunted. She healed. She survived. He realized, in a daze of fever and weakness, that she was not holding on to him. He was holding on to her. Her unbending will was the one thing keeping his spirit from sliding into the darkness, from following his family into the earth. He began to heal. The wounds in his body, tended by Ishta and Emma, began to close. The wounds in his soul, tended by her presence, began to scar. When he was finally able to stand, leaning on a stick, the camp had to move. The soldiers, they knew, would not give up. They would search. The high ledge was a temporary refuge, not a home. They traveled, a small, nomadic band of ghosts, 13 of them. They moved south, always south, deeper into the vast, unknown, and unmapped wilderness. They moved at night, resting during the day, leaving no trail, building no fires. They were a whisper in the desert. Emma rode beside him. He was still weak, and she watched him, her eyes as vigilant as his had once been for her. Their roles had reversed. She was the protector now. Their old life, the world of stagecoaches and towns, of Boston and Silas Croft, might as well have been on another planet. It was gone. Mr. Malone, the soldiers, they were a fading, bloody memory. The hunt had ended. They had vanished from the white man's world, as if they had simply stepped off the edge of it. This new life was hard. It was a life of near-constant hunger, of cold nights, of aching muscles. It was a life of watchfulness. It was not a perfect life. It was a real one. And in this harsh, real life, they were no longer Caleb and Emma, Apache and white woman. They were just a matched pair. The barriers between them, the last thin walls of culture and experience, dissolved. They lived as one. They slept under the same blankets, sharing their warmth against the high desert cold. They spoke in a broken mix of English and Apache, a new language belonging only to them. He taught her the names of the stars as his people knew them. She taught him the songs her mother had loved, humming them, her voice low and soft in the darkness. He saw the wit in her, a dry, quiet humor that bloomed in the face of hardship. She saw the gentleness in him, the profound, deep kindness that he had buried under a mountain of grief. One night, sitting by a smokeless fire of dry mesquite, she was mending his shirt, her head bent, her fingers calloused and strong, pushing the bone needle. He reached out and touched her hair. It was no longer the fine, coiffed hair of a Boston lady. It was wild, thick, and streaked by the sun. "You are," he said, his voice rough, "the strongest person I have ever known, stronger than any warrior. You have Zil mountain spirit." She looked up, her eyes meeting his in the firelight. She did not blush. She did not look away. She simply accepted his words, a truth she had earned. "You are the kindest," she said, her voice just as quiet. "You have the heart that bleeds for others. That is why I stayed." He moved, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. This was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the canyon. This was something else. This was a promise. This was a homecoming. He kissed her, and it was a kiss of peace, of recognition, of a love that had been forged in fire and tempered in blood. It was a love that was as solid and as enduring as the rocks around them. They found their place. After a year of wandering, they came to a high, hidden valley in the Chiricahua Mountains, a place of pine and oak, with a stream that ran all year and so high, so remote, that no one had ever set foot in it. They were safe. They built a new life. The others, the small remnant of their band, built their wiki-ups. Caleb and Emma built a small cabin, a mix of stone and pine, solid against the winter wind. The years passed. The world below changed. Railroads cut the land. The last of the free Apaches were hunted, captured, but they were never found. They were a story that had ended, a patrol that had never returned, a bounty that was never claimed. Emma gave birth to a son. He was a beautiful, strong boy, with his father's black hair and serious eyes, and his mother's determined, stubborn chin. They named him Taza, for the son Caleb had lost, and for the old man who had died in the canyon. It was a name of rebirth. 2 years later, a daughter was born, a wild, laughing girl with her mother's light brown hair and her father's eyes. One late afternoon, in the high, clear autumn, Emma stood on the edge of the valley. The prairie grass was gold, the sky a deep, aching blue. She was no longer 28. She was a woman in her prime, her face lined by the sun and by laughter, her hands strong. She was beautiful, not with the fragile beauty of a Boston parlor, but with the beauty of a mountain, of a tree that has survived. Caleb came to stand beside her. The wounds had scarred. He walked with a slight limp, and his body was a map of his past. But the cold stone in his heart was gone. It had been replaced. He was a husband. He was a father. He was a man who was, finally, at peace. Their children, Taza and the little girl were playing nearby, their laughter rising in the clear, cold air. Caleb reached for her hand, his rough, scarred fingers interlaced with hers, a perfect, familiar fit. They did not need to speak. Their life was a shared language. They stood together, two survivors, a matched pair, and looked out at the vast, wild, and beautiful land. It was their home. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. She had been sent west, a too-old bride, a piece of property, to a life of duty and quiet desperation. She had been lost, and she had been found. She had found that love was not a polite, gentle thing that happened in parlors. It was a wild, fierce, and unbending force. It did not care about age, or race, or the rules of a world that would have kept them apart. It was a law unto itself, and in the heart of the wilderness, against all odds, it had given her a home. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video. And support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.